Hello, welcome everybody. I'm Searchmo. I'm on Spotify, Instagram, SIRCHMO. Today I'm going to be going over my own formulated governmental model, which is called a holobiocracy, um, which is coined from the term holobiont, which is used to describe an amalgamation of individual organisms acting as one. So this holobiocracy relies on minimalistic government and is sustained by cultures. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I can get through this. Uh, okay. The architecture of a living civilization, as opposed to a mechanical one. So, what's my approach? What this holobiocracy seeks to avoid is unmanaged tribalism from a fragmented and isolated, chaotic culture stemmed from a hyper-centralized government that that is reinforced by monoculture, forced assimilation, and bureaucratic bloat, which creates the unsustainable present. So, the minimalistic government approach could be described in this case as a decentralized confederation built on a single biological imperative, total non-interference, and shared necessities of trade, defense, and innovation. So this institution would be called the biome, which would manage defense, medicine, and innovation. So, if we compare a traditional nation state to a holobiocracy, we can clearly see the advantages of my model, where the representation of a nation state um, is hyperinflated, relies on extractive capitalism from a demographic imperialistic representation that is resolved by military force and political coercion. My model, or the holobiocracy, would be a flat representation of radical parity, a default to rejection legislation process, a biomimetic metabolism, which is a one nutrient or or a nutrient equals $1 metric, which is established throughout the cultures uh, that that need them. Now, the crisis resolution for a holobiocracy would be a psychological integration and shamanic, pretty much circuit breaker. So if we look at this overall, we can see the biome that manages global defense, medical advancement, and overarching innovation, which is stemmed by the five representatives per culture, otherwise known as the staples, which, because of its five representatives per culture, strips away demographic size as a weapon for political dominance. Now, all this branches out into each culture that is autonomous to practice distinct traditions and cultural philosophy, which is supported by a metabolic floor that distributes resources for culture influence. Now, okay, if say there is a mini biome jury that replaces professional lobbying with cross-cultural empathy. When a cultural practice is challenged, A 75 consensus triggers an intervention, which necessitates the mini biome, which is comprised of three random selected individuals per culture that requires an individual culture that is defending their cultural practice to translate their practice into the fundamental human values that cross all the cultural lines of the biome. Now, if there is an instance where a culture uh, argues that their cultural practice is innovative despite the 75 consensus and veto and deadlock dismantellation, they'll be able to veto and trigger a shamanic circuit breaker to see if their cultural practice is innovative and progressive for the whole biome. Now, okay, this would rely on a this would be this would be because of the staples being deadlocked from their political ego pretty much. Um, which would require a vetted shaman across all cultures, that's established by consensus, uh, requiring the non-local systematic clarity, if you will. So, the recursive psyche paradigm. This acts as the biome's universal translator across all cultures, which believes that all cultures are part of a unified consciousness that views religion as the mythic language of the macrocosmos, psychology, the internal language of the microcosmos, and sociology, the interpersonal language of the collective. So all these would be a way to view and to vet the shaman in regards to dealing with the veto, um, or the petition to keep their cultural practice. Now, okay, the recursive psyche paradigm it relies on two main aspects, the depraved ego and the benevolent ego. The depraved ego is incorporated by unintegrated trauma, repetition compulsion, fragmentation, and the capitalization of people for profit. Now, the benevolent ego would be an integrated, defined as an integrated consciousness, establishing innovation, cross-cultural empathy, and systemic security. So civil schisms as psychic debts requiring the mediation of masks. So this is describing as I have been saying, the fracture, the internal conflict arises, the 75% consensus, the diagnosis, the unintegrated trauma, a repetition compulsion that's viewed as a worm by the consensus, the intervention, the mediation of mass begins as the biome helps, the factions recognize their conflicts. The translation, fractions translate their local grievances into unified dialect. And the resolution, the loop is closed. The psychic vacuum is sealed before a demon can take root, otherwise known as a worm, something uh, that's not good for the whole biome, otherwise that seeks to degrade it. So diagnosing an agency virus or a worm requires a strict burden of proof. It must pass through three gates, which is the psychic void. Does it capitalize people for profit? Now, all this is overseen by the mini jurors. Okay, does it capitalize pe people for profit, identified as the depraved ego? Does it cause semantic drifts? Does it disrupt the recursive psyche paradigm? Breaks the universal translator, the cross-cultural disciplinary? Does it contradict and the third gate, does it contradict the culture's own established pillars, proving it as an invasive worm, not as a sovereign tradition that's beneficial across the whole biome? So, if proven, the 75 vote triggers this systematic excision of the virus. If it's labeled a worm, if it doesn't pass through these three gates. Now, the soil or the base of the economics is dependent upon the nutrients, or a one nutrient per equals $1, which is not a tool of accumulation. It is a nutrient required for homeostasis. The biome guarantees a metabolic floor to prevent the psychic vacuums of poverty that attract parasitic agencies. Excuse me. So the culture's investments from the nutrients would be directly going into the three pillars of innovation, defense, and medicine. The soil acts as the metabolic flora, as I said, and all this is dependent upon each other. So, in order to mitigate cross-cultural friction, or to foster benevolence and the benevolent ego, um, each culture would be tasked with to establishing cultural sports games that serve as loop resolution simulators, forcing players to navigate different cultural dialects in real time. Now, in terms of comedy, the comedians will act as the mirror of the undivided mind, using satire to safely expose the shadow and dissolve rigid ego boundaries across cultural disciplinaries and values. Also, another substance would be the media, the film and storytelling to prevent semantic drift by continually illustrating the differences between benevolent and depraved egos. So all this acts as the resilience or the shield that protects the biome. Okay, so all this is required for the preservation of the living state rights, not a passive museum, I suppose. By translating ancient oral traditions into interactive digital experiences, the biome ensures close cultural memory thrives as a living shared dialect. So you can see this as games, interactive simulators that transform local history in a universal accessible dialect, training the recursive psyche paradigm. So all this acts as a self-organizing mirror, where the mini biome jury and shamanic breaker guards the agency against the virus that is comprised of cultural gymnastics, cultural and media cross-cultural mitigation and interwoven means of assimilation, which is provided uh, by the nutrients established established in each sovereign culture that is viewed through the lens by the culture as the over as the by the biome through the recursive Psyche Paradigm, or the Unified Dialect. So, this holobiocracy is not a machine to be managed. It is the universe refining its own mirror, an infinite self-organizing mind, waking up to what it has always been. So that concludes my governmental model. I created all this myself, with my own theories and my own ideas, because I do not like our political and social climate. I think everything is really driven toward division and capitalization, um, and sterilization, I suppose. If you guys like this video, if you guys have had similar ideas, if you disagree, or like if you guys want to talk, if you guys have suggestions or anything that might, add to it or even contradict it, I need pushback too. So please give me what you feel is required, and I will try my best to defend it. I'm not a politician. I'm a college dropout, but yeah, so tell me what you think. I'll leave it up to you guys. Thank you guys. Have a blessed day.